as thank you if you're joining us at home. Welcome to UEA, to the Thomas Paine Study Centre. And welcome to the Joyce Morris Early Years Literacies Forum. This is the second in a series of public lectures that we are hosting. And we are delighted to have people both in the room and also those of you joining us at home online. This event has been made possible through the partnership with the Tykes Research Group and also the British Sociological Association. So we'd like to say thank you for helping us to organise this event. We've got quite a diverse mix of attendees today, which should provide us with the opportunity for some real positive discussion and taking in a range of perspectives, so don't be shy. Do share your ideas and thoughts with us. In your joining instructions or your attending email, you'll have received information about us using your comments. So the research team and myself as part of the Joyce Morris Forum, we take your feedback so that we can help improve our events for future. So please be aware that anything that you submit online or to the feedback forms will be used anonymously. We do value all your suggestions, comments, and insight. For those of you at home, you'll have been given a link to a Padlet, which is our main communication tool. If you're in the room with us today, you've got a feedback form in your folder, but equally you can use the Padlet too, so the QR code is there if you like. For those of you who haven't used a Padlet before, you'll see that in each of the columns there's a translucent plus sign. If you click on that, you can add a comment or a suggestion in that particular column. So you'll see that second column along that says, where are you joining us from? You can add a comment there and just check that it's functioning for you at home. For those of you in the room, we know you've come from not too far, I guess. Okay, so as we go, there is a section, the third column along, you'll see says questions, comments to share with Sonia. So as she's talking, you might think up something that you would like her to talk about further. By all means, add questions either during or after the lecture, and we're going to have a little period for a Q&A and sort of discussion. You'll also see there towards the right-hand side the lecture pack. So for even for those who are in the room today, there's a PDF of Sonia's lecture notes, there's recommendations, there's all sorts of links for you following this lecture. So do go on there and have a look. And so let's get on to the main business of this evening. So I am thrilled to be able to introduce you today to our guest speaker. We have Sonia Livingston with us today. She is a professor in the Department of Media and Communications in the London School of Economics and Political Science. She has, amongst many things, published 21 books on media audiences, including Parenting for the Digital Future, How Hopes and Fears About Technology Shape Children's Lives. She's also advised the UK government, European Commission, European Parliament, UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, OECD, ITU, and UNICEF and others on children's internet safety and rights in the digital environment. She also directs the Digital Futures for Children Research Centre at LSE and the Five Rights Foundation and Global Kids Online with UNICEF. We couldn't have anyone better to talk to us today about the benefits of digital technology for young children. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Sonia Livingston. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to talk to you, those in the room and also those online. As Eleanor said, I'm working at a centre called Digital Futures for Children, and we are trying to be responsive to current debates and bring evidence and research to those current debates. And the current debate does seem to be about the idea of a ban. I'm hearing calls for bans and restrictions and anxieties about this digital technology that we have unleashed upon the world. So we're hearing the calls on all sides. I'm an academic, so I'm going to suggest to you that things are more complex and would not be solved by a ban, but I'm also very curious to hear what you think, so I'm going to keep an eye on my clock and aim to get to the questions. I can't see what you're putting in the Padlet, but I hope there is some mechanism where someone is going to tell me. So I guess my starting point is to suggest we're living through a major cultural transformation. I don't think we can overestimate how significant it is. I've found myself in recent years talking about the idea of a digital world. There are a number of different kind of language people are using to mark the transformation that we're living through. Sometimes I think about digital in terms of the infrastructure, what we stand on, how we kind of structure our lives, how we're embedding technology into so many different aspects of our activities that our children are growing up in very many ways in a very different kind of a world. People talk about the post-digital or the idea of a hybrid world. Those old ideas of online and offline aren't really working for us very well anymore, which I think we're all trying to kind of grapple with the nature of these changes. So it seems appropriate that we find a way to kind of go beyond polarized questions. My title is a polarized, is it good, is it bad? I think we're looking for a kind of a language of how we can understand how to go beyond that and how especially to go beyond simple solutions, simple technological solutions like turn it off. And I think there's also a question for those of us in the university about how much the evidence that we have available to us can really kind of help us kind of navigate a way to what I see are a lot of normative questions. I think people don't just want to know what is, how things are, but also how they should be. What are the kind of right ways forward? What does good look like for children growing up in this digital world? What should be the roles of the parents, the researchers, the teachers, the educators, the health visitors, all the different people around, including the tech companies, including the government. There are lots of different actors in this space. So at the Digital Futures for Children Centre, we're really trying to kind of bring together the research with the current questions and find that way of moving from what is to what we think should be, and how do we kind of build the recommendations and the actions that are needed. And within that, I think it is, I really appreciate the invitation to speak to the Joyce Morris Early Years Literacies Forum, because there's not been so much focus on early years, and a lot of the public debate and public concern at the moment is still really focusing on adolescents as if they are the centre. They are super important, but they are not the only children that matter. And that kind of question about, children, very young children, they're the newest users, we could suggest the most vulnerable users. Maybe they face the highest stakes as they are growing up in a digital world that is pretty experimental for all the adults around, and they will turn out as they do in 20 or 30 years, and we may or may not be paying attention at that point, but right now we care how that turns out. So I can't quite remember where I got this slide from. That's a terrible omission, but I love that it captures quite a lot of the anxieties that I think are out there and the public debate. The idea that screen time problems sit in the center of a whole series of anxieties that we have about children, actually children of all ages. And when you look at a slide like this, you can see exactly why it is that people are calling for a ban, because screen time is doing a lot of damage. But I think also images like this kind of illustrate the problem as I want to present it to you. Screen time, I suggest, cannot possibly be the main cause of all of these problems. Many of these problems predate the digital age, so we need to kind of have a little historical perspective. Not all of these problems are very clearly documented, even though they get talked about, so we need some attention to the nature of the evidence that can underpin them. And I think really crucially, all of these problems, insofar as they do occur, have multiple causes. And so the harder question is to work out where digital activities and digital engagement fit within all the other causes that apply to children and young people. And so we need more complex research, and we need to kind of look deeper into the patterns that are really shaping children's lives. And we might want to go into some of the research that lies behind all of these lines at some point if you want. But my very quick and glib summary would be to say, when people are doing research on poor mental well-being or depression in childhood or children's sleep time or sleep problems, very rarely, if ever, is their digital activity shown up in evidence to be a major part of the story. It might be there, it might be compounding, it might be exacerbating, it might be alleviating, but I'm going to struggle to think of cases where it is kind of the main issue. A few years ago, I was invited to join a group that was seeking to advise the UK Chief Medical Officers producing the physical activity guidelines for very young children, and this kind of helps to illustrate, if you like, the point that I've just made about the evidence. So this was focusing on the under fives, and identified absolutely a lack of evidence around screen time, to the point where the conclusion of the report was that there are very clear and solid bases of evidence for making recommendations about physical activity guidelines for the under fives, but insufficient evidence to draw any conclusions about screen time. So screen time, the link to screen time was not accepted by the chief medical officers. So that might seem to you a puzzle. I think what the research does show is that some of the factors linked to screen activity are also important for the guidelines. So if screen time means eating more junk food, if screen time means not being physically active but being sedentary, if screen time means a lack of social interaction, then I think the chief medical officers would say, yes, screen time is kind of associated with the problems, but what really matters actually is children's diet, children's physical activity, and children's social interaction. And so that's what they have decided to highlight. And I don't think that is any surprise to those who are working with or knowledgeable about early years. So if we put it positively, what do children need? They need physical activity, social interaction, emotional warmth, human responsiveness, stimulating opportunities. We know all of that, I think. And especially they need the chance to kind of stretch their wings and grow. So screen time may be a problem that is maybe kind of built into some of that, but it may also be part of a solution, or it may be just a different experience in children's lives, and that's where the effort to understand becomes more complex. The World Health Organization's latest recommendations for early childhood actually say something very similar. So I was fascinated reading the latest guidelines on improving early childhood development, that the WHO actually doesn't really make any mention of technology at all. And again says what really matters is responsive caregiving, early learning, integrated caregiving, nutrition, and supporting maternal health, or supporting parental, supporting parents. So, you know, there's quite a disjunction between the expert guidelines and some of the kind of lived panics out there in the media, and I think also in many parents' lives. On the right there, I've put a slide from the WHO advice now for older children and mental health, older children and young people, just to really kind of note the wide range of factors that are considered causes of mental health problems among young people, within which media and technology makes its appearance as one of many factors, but one of many other factors. So the call for a ban, given that the expert debate is taking a different kind of much more multi-factor direction, I think begins to be in itself kind of puzzling and interesting. In my book on parenting for a digital future, I was just going to reflect. We interviewed their parents with children of very many ages. These were interviews done, in fact, just before the pandemic. And we found parents very aware of, for example, the screen time rules from the American Academy of Pediatrics. They could tell us about the 2x2 rules. They didn't always know who had proposed them. Or where they came from, and that's fine. I mean, it's kind of bizarre in a way that parents in Britain and other countries are reading the guidelines of the American Academy of Pediatrics, but somehow that idea of no screen time for those under 2 and no more than 2 hours for those over has kind of caught on. It was a catchy bit of communications, actually. Parents have, in interviews, have revealed a lot of anxiety about the very fact of the rules. So not only is the idea of screen time in a way a kind of scientific problem, but it's also, I want to suggest, become something of a lived problem within families. So parents know of the rule, they struggle to put it into practice. I think they struggle to put it in practice partly because in the time since the rules were developed, technology has become part of our infrastructure. It's not just how we zone out from paying attention to each other. It's also how we stay in touch with each other. It's how we book, I don't know, cinema tickets, or check the bus time, or look at the weather, or WhatsApp the family. It has a whole series of uses in everyday life. And if we're counting how many seconds count towards our 2 hour maximum, we'll all be driven crazy. And that's what parents very often say. So they kind of feel the burden of the rule, they feel their own failures to kind of match up to what they know to be the rule, and then they worry about what it really means. Is all time equivalent, or is it okay if you're WhatsApping Granny? Is, you know, this app educational, but maybe that app doesn't seem, you know, how do I tell what is good time? Is it okay if my child is learning to read on the screen? There's actually lots of research about that, and perhaps some experts in the room about whether reading on the screen or on a piece of paper or in a book is better or worse. Very importantly, I think what parents were telling me in that book was that there was something about the role that they were put in kind of managing the rules. And I really began to feel they were talking about being like the police to their child. And they would talk about policing the screen time rules and policing screen time. And I started to wonder, well, if the parent of the police, you know, what does that make the child? And what does that make the parent-child relationship? Parents feel that they are judging, but by the same token, they feel that they are being judged. So this conversation about bans, which leads to a conversation about policing and judging, conflicts in a very puzzling way, and I truly am kind of puzzled how society can manage multiple discourses at the same time. Because the reason we called our book Parenting for a Digital Future is that parents also feel, and maybe early as educators and others, caught up in the kind of necessity of preparing children for a digital future. Because actually, the future will be digital, the future. Perhaps the present is already digital. So there's this kind of pull and push where, you know, too much is, almost anything is too much and seemingly problematic. But on the other hand, it is the world that we live in. And I was just going to show you some quotes from parents struggling with this kind of double message from society about police it and limit it and lock it down and stop it. And on the other hand, embrace it. Make sure your child has the skills, make sure your child is prepared for a digital future, that they are going to be able to have the literacies and knowledge for jobs that haven't been invented yet, and that they can really make sure their child gets ahead. And there were some great quotes from parents, the difficulty to predict how much the world has changed even in just 10 years, how hard it is to predict the moment when your child is grown up. If I ask you all now to give me a portrait of life in 2040, do you feel confident of doing that? And yet if you have a young child, that's when they'll, you know, enter into adulthood. And so I really began to kind of, through writing this book, really to kind of empathize with the challenge parents have, which they've always had in a way. You know, life has always changed and they've always had to imagine things different. But this is a fast transformation. This is a transformation that is being driven by major global businesses and a lot of enthusiasm from governments. And it's not exactly coming from what it is people wanted and felt they needed, but they feel they've got to get on board. So you can see the kind of the desire, you know, we want the kids to be fluent in the grammar of coding while their minds are still plastic. We want them to the technologies are going to affect society in every single way. We have to, you know, kids have got to get a different way of thinking, learn a different way of doing things. They've got to have all the different tools at their fingertips. And yet, even though technology is the future, technology is not reliable. And that's a message that kind of came forward. So in that top right-hand quote, technology is not reliable. You're going to have to, so you still need to be able to read and write, not have technology do everything for you. Still, you know, they've got to have the old way and the new way, and it's all down somehow. I mean, parents feel very burdened with it being down to them to have to figure this out. So we also heard in the book quite a lot about parents feeling unsupported and unsure and not, you know, clear where to turn. I know different professionals around them have different stories. I was told yesterday by a group of teachers that as they see it, there is the parent problem. So I think there are some kind of, you know, slightly tensions between the different actors around the child, and technology is in some ways exacerbating some of those tensions too. So parents want to prepare for the future. They know they can't just ban it. They can't just limit it because they've got to get their child ahead. They feel they've got to kind of navigate this difficult balance. And so we concluded the book with an argument that I'm hoping you'll find convincing, but I don't know. But anyway, I started to think parents are actually facing a lot of challenges and a lot of uncertainties, and most of them they cannot control. If they are living in poverty, if they are struggling with family breakdown, if they are living in a disadvantaged neighborhood, if they are living facing the difficulties of migration and prejudice, if they're just if their child is just facing the academic pressures that children tell us is their kind of number one factor undermining their well-being. You know, there are a whole set of things, many of which parents feel they cannot control. And somehow they feel that the technology in their home is the bit that maybe they can control. They did decide what they were going to buy. They do decide at what age to give their child a smartphone. They do have some control, or in principle, over which apps they can use and so forth. So even though it feels like a minefield, it also feels like the area where they feel they ought to be able to have some control. And so we started to hear a lot of what parents said about technology is actually anxieties about parenting, anxieties about their children, anxieties about the future, anxieties about finding their place and kind of navigating their values. But they talk about it through technology. So, you know, what are the apps is really what kind of values do I want my child to have? What kind of way do I want them to live? Who do I want them to be? Who do they want to be? And I think that thought maybe helps us when we look at some of the stats, because I know when we see the stats from Ofcom about what even the youngest children are doing, you could think, what is going on? On the one hand, we have a call for bans, and on the other hand, we have 27% of 3 to 4-year-olds in this country with their own mobile phone, or 90% of them at 3 to 4 using WhatsApp, and an increasing number using TikTok, Snapchat, 90% using YouTube, and rising numbers using the others. So, you know, if we don't get into the minds of parents and think about the challenges and the resources open to them, we can start to, as people sometimes do, stand on the outside and see them as a kind of hypocrite in a way. You know, there they are, talking the language of policing and bans, but actually they've bought all this stuff, you know, or maybe they, you know, so my effort is always to try to respect all the professionals and the parents who are trying to do the right thing by the child. And so, you know, I'm trying to kind of understand they have these dual discourses. Get your child into the world, prepare your child, and yet also then worry about it. So lots of 3 to 4-year-olds, 3 to 7 are, you know, not only provided with digital devices, but you can see on a journey in terms of using apps increasingly. I mean, very smart of you guys here, Harry and Simon, Laura, others, to be really focusing on YouTube. It is clearly absolutely the killer app across the age range. But the others are becoming very significant, and how do we understand from a kind of you know, early years perspective what is going on? I think I have a couple more. Yes, just to kind of add a little more. So this is what they're using, and then this question to parents was, do you agree or disagree that for my child the benefits of using social media outweigh the risks? And I was very struck by, even for parents of 3 to 4-year-olds, mostly they agree the benefits of using social media sites outweigh the risks. And then a third question, do you feel you know enough to help your child stay safe online? Again, parents broadly are saying yes, they slightly or strongly agree that they know what they're doing. And I think that's, so in a way, there's quite a lot of confidence. And then we might ask ourselves, what are they doing? What are they so confident about? What do they think their children are doing with the tech? So there was a report published just last week called Toddlers, Tech and Talk. I don't know if led by a team led by Rosie Flewitt. And I went to the launch and was fascinated by their framing of very detailed observations and also a national survey on what it is that 0 to 3-year-olds, from birth to 3, what are they doing with their technology? Which actually is a question we could not even have asked, I think, perhaps 15 years ago, but now is a researchable topic because things are changing quite fast. And they take an early years literacies approach, and I think the report is worth reading, but I thought I'd just show you one graph from that report, because I think a lot of the anxiety when we think about what small children are doing with technology is really that idea that we all love to criticize the parent who's left their child on their own with the device, the child who's been given the device in the restaurant or in the pushchair when the parent is busy, or just in the house, that idea that they're doing it on their own. So I just their national survey maps out, this is what is the 0 to 3-year-old doing on the smartphone, obviously as reported by the parent, and you can see in blue what they're doing on their own, and in purple what they're doing with a parent. I'll just let you have a think about that. Because maybe it was because I went to the launch and I heard them talking about the interaction between the parents and the child, but also because I just started thinking about the taking of photos, looking at family photos together, playing games very often together, playing music, speaking with family and friends as the number one with a parent activity. Yes, not so much being creative or reading books or doing, some of the kind of worthy things that maybe we think we want parents and children to be doing, and maybe the smartphone is a powerful tool to do it. But a lot of entertainment, quite a lot of fun, music, singing, interacting, talking about the family, talking with the family. When you kind of start getting into the who and the what, the content and the connections and the kind of context of the interactions, perhaps we can begin to reach more nuance and maybe a better balance between the polarization of it's all terrible or it's all great, and think a little further about it. I really loved the language they developed that I think resonates also with the research here, in terms of a kind of early childhood literacies. So they convey that sense of child-led exploration, the way in which children are learning through play, making predictions, experimenting, a lot of activities with siblings that isn't, there's often a sense of the child user on their own, but a lot of these devices are used with siblings, having fun, being silly, solving puzzles, dancing, moving about. This was a case that I made when we were doing the work for the chief medical officers, and they kept saying if a child is using the screen, then they are sedentary. And I kept saying, well, if the child is using the screen, they might be sedentary, but they might be jumping about and dancing and acting it out and singing along, and, let's ask. And then it turned out we don't really have the evidence even to properly answer that, or we're just beginning to get the evidence to kind of know better what they're doing. And then again, that idea with the parent raises a question about different parent roles, not just parents as police, but parents as perhaps playmates or mentors, or kind of brokering the child's relationship with the family, or explaining to the child through looking through the photos, who is in the social network, and telling stories about the people that the child knows and will, come to form relationships with, and so on. It's a broader range of parent roles, child roles, and a broader conception of the parent-child interaction. So this very much resonated with me in relation to the book that I just published, that I wanted to give you a few stories from. So the book we just published is called Digital Media Use in Early Childhood. It was done, field work was done just before the pandemic in both Britain and Australia. And I'm curious whether people really think that things have transformed in the last few years. I don't know. Possibly they have, but possibly not. So we did ethnographic interviews, quite a lot of observation, because we began the work, I think the youngest children were about 6 months old, and we went up to the age of 6, as you can see. And we use a range of techniques to try to understand from the child point of view, the parent point of view, also early years educators and grandparents. So we had these kind of different constituencies. And we had developed an idea that I'd first put forward in the Parenting for a Digital Future, which was to think not in terms of classifying families, but in terms of kind of classifying practices, to see the practices that families are developing in terms of some forms or some ways of embracing what digital technologies could offer, what the benefits might be, some ways of resisting and kind of trying to contain and restrict how the technologies might change their lives or undermine their values or introduce new practices that they didn't want, so they would be kind of resisting. But overwhelmingly, a lot of balancing, a lot of trying to kind of explore the positives while containing the problems, or as families saw it. And that mix, and even the nature of the balancing, what families were trying to balance, would vary considerably. Actually, it would vary really a lot across different kinds of families in accordance with whatever matters for them or whatever is structuring their lives, whether it's socioeconomic constraint or the fact that their family is diasporic and lived across countries and technology is a vital way of staying in touch for some. Or families who had a child with special needs and disabilities for whom technology often features as a really kind of a sort of beacon of hope that it might become the workaround, the route by which a child can develop and advance. So let me just give you a few snapshots from the field work, and then I'm going to move into what good looks like and a bit more of the normative, what should happen. We were talking earlier about field work with children under 2. And, you know, it just happens if you're kind of in the home. I don't know, here was one mum who kind of told us how her 14-month-old needs help to open the app on the phone, but as soon as he's got it all sussed out. He's kind of happily navigating and knows how to get on with it. A 19-month-old Owen who knows how to hold a phone and how to talk on FaceTime and turn it off, which he loves doing. By contrast with a 12-month-old who cried when a video call with her dad ended and then kind of pointed at the screen like, you know, where's he gone? You know, can we bring him back onto the screen again? A dad of a 23-month-old who is trying to kind of puzzle out this idea of the child's kind of intuitive grasp of touch screens and kind of navigating screens, which, you know, even puzzled the dad. And yet at the same time, we had various videos looking at the interaction, and you could kind of see the sort of the micro scaffolding that parents do when they may not even seem to be paying attention, but the child sort of, they pass the device between them, or they point and they look and then they go back to their separate activities. But there's a lot of micro coordination that goes on as the parent is scaffolding, often encouraging a child's independent activities and independent use. At the same time, even at that age, or perhaps especially at that age, parents were concerned about the kind of the child mesmerized by the smartphone and the way in which they were kind of staring, and they read into that, you know, all the things that society tells them, and you know, again, we can debate it, but they read in primarily their failure and the kind of risk to their child that they were never going to develop successfully, and you know, there was a whole lot of kind of parent self-blaming and guilt that goes along with that. By our chapter on the 2 to 4 year olds, you know, we could already see 2-year-olds actively choosing what they watch on YouTube. We watched Leopoldo, who was browsing videos on one side of the screen while watching his chosen content on the other, and then kind of listening to his mum, who was concerned that he could do jigsaws on the iPad, but he couldn't do a jigsaw when the pieces were on the coffee table in the living room. Different kinds of rules. So in our Australian colleagues, were sitting with a family who'd migrated from China, who were on the one hand kind of worried about the idea that YouTube was addictive, and they sort of felt it was a problem. But on the other hand, watching Peppa Pig was how she integrated, you know, as a migrant child into her new community in the Australian kindergarten. And as the mum said, Peppa Pig has taught her what Christmas is all about, which she didn't know when she came from China, but now she knows, and she can talk about it and doesn't feel so lonely, and so on. We have lots of evidence of children singing along, dancing around, kind of acting out. One child who was only allowed the audio because the dad, perhaps understandably, didn't like the girls twerking on the screen, so wasn't going to have his daughter seeing that, but she could have the audio and would still dance around, hardly sedentary. Children beginning to learn what the society tells them about technology. So one 3.5-year-old who his mum was talking about his tantrums when she tries to take the iPad away. And then we played a kind of, you know, good, bad, neutral pile, and he had to sort the various tech and toys that he played with. And he put the iPad in the neutral pile, even though he clearly loved it. And the researcher said, "Doesn't it make you happy?" And he said, "Well, maybe sometimes." But he kind of absorbed his mum's ambivalence, and he was, you know, through her absorbing society's ambivalence and so forth. So, you know, I could tell you a lot more, and maybe I will not give more accounts. I think what I'm really kind of trying to capture here is that it's possible to engage with the voices and perspectives of very young children. Actually, the youngest were 4 months in our field work. We really tried in the analysis to kind of put their activities within the context of their family dynamics and their particular circumstances, and really grasp some of the variation and the variety, but also, of course, the ways in which society is bearing down on parents and giving them this sense that you want it, you need to be ahead, but don't go too far. So, as I've said, a lot of kind of blaming, a lot of anxiety, and a lot of not knowing where to turn. So let us think a little bit in this kind of last section about where to turn and how to support those who are living with, working with, engaging with young children in this digital world. So this is a different kind of a slide, but it's a slide I stare a lot with because I'm increasingly working with a child rights framework and increasingly trying to think about the way in which digital technologies are really affecting every dimension of children's lives. Very often we think in terms of the right to protection, the importance of protection around technologies, but we could also, especially with very young children, think about the right to play, or the importance of play, the importance of entertainment and leisure, the importance of social connection, but also perhaps the concern about privacy and the way in which early childhood is becoming appified and datafied and potentially exploited, because this digital infrastructure we're building for all of our lives, including our children's, is not only technological, but it's also by and large commercial. And it runs according to a commercial business model that may or may not, in the language of the convention, respect the best interests of the child and support the rights of the child. So one reason I think about the full array of rights is that it's very a strong feature of the convention that all the rights are to be understood as interlinked and indivisible. They're all part of, you cannot, as it were, build a system for child protection without also thinking what are the implications for children's voice, or for children's privacy, or for children's right to play in their world. Similarly, you cannot build a system that is promoting the child's right to education without also thinking what are the implications for their freedom from commercial exploitation, which worries me a lot about EdTech, or the importance of their voice in kind of having an impact on or designing the systems that they engage with, or thinking about the role of the family to kind of shape the context for a child, which itself is quite hard when the commercial technology kind of is the same for everyone and kind of mainstreams everyone within the one commercial vision, irrespective of all the differences that research always shows up among people. In the last few years, I mentioned that I've been working with the Committee on the Rights of the Child. I was working with them to write a document called General Comment 25, which was how the committee explains how rights apply in the digital world and what the roles of everyone should be. What are the responsibilities of parents in relation to the digital world? What are the responsibilities of businesses in relation to the digital world? What are the responsibilities of government, and so on? And I just want to kind of pull out in relation to play. And play, I think, is one of the most quintessential dimensions of early childhood, but also one of the most contested ones in relation to technology. And play in many people's minds means play in the physical, natural world, as if children don't live in, cramped flats with dangerous streets and too many cars around, but they should be running in the fields, which, is lovely. But we were trying to think through, okay, what does play look like in a digital world? And I just put up some of the things, I think what was important about this document was trying to kind of think through how does the right to play look in a digital world? Who should be responsible? How can it respond to children's differing identities, cultural identities, languages, heritage, and so forth? Can the state, does the state, do we want the state, the government to give guidance about digital play? It kind of holds back from that at the moment, but I think I heard from a lot of parents and professionals, they would quite like guidance about what is good or what is supportive or what helps with development. Do we get that at the moment? At the same time, the Committee on the Rights of the Child was very clear that we want to think about alternatives. We don't want to say the digital would ever be the be-all and end-all. It would also be about the digital in relation to the physical and the natural world. And increasingly, if we do anticipate technology in 10 years' time, I think we'll see more and more hybrid technologies that actually merge those. And then really crucially, last point there, if play is moving, in part at least, from playing outside in the street or the garden or the playground to online, it is moving at the same time from a non-commercial to a commercial space. And how do we can we build that in a way that is non-commercial? And when I was doing some of this work, I was following the work of and trying to consult with the work of Tim Gill and the Rethinking Childhood group, and I just put up some pictures from them because for me this is a kind of inspiration by analogy. So I don't know if you know of this work, but this is kind of re-landscaping our play spaces and play streets and towns and cities for children in ways that is rights respecting, in ways that is kind of labels child-led free play. So these are all top to bottom kind of, I don't know why he's put the after before the before. Anyway, the one on the left is, a play street once you've told the cars that they are second to the human beings. The second one, which is actually round the corner for me, and I meant to go and didn't quite manage to go and see it. The bottom is the kind of the boring playground, and then the top is the let's consult the kids and design the playground that works for them. And then much more ambitiously than a local street or a local playground, the one at the end is, let's take a dull bit of waste ground in the city and pedestrianize it in a way that human beings, because actually when children are playing in the street, you notice that the elderly people feel that they can come out, and the isolated parents stuck at home with a baby feel that they've got somewhere to go and kind of have a chat on the corner, and actually everyone sort of takes their role in observing how the children are and keeping them kind of safe, but also letting them get on with it. And you actually get a whole. So you start trying to design for children, and in fact you design for pretty much everyone. And so I asked myself, can we do this online? Can we think about these kind of possibilities online? And I'm going to be very brief now in my last slides, but I'm just going to say that in the work we did in Digital Futures, we tried to kind of map what offline play looks like, consult children about where they saw, and professionals and others about where they saw those possibilities for child-led play, for free play online, and then think how could we kind of design the online world in a way that took its lead from what children had to say. And actually the cardboard box became my metaphor, my object for thinking with for that year that we were doing the work, because of all the things that children talked about in playing in the material, physical world. The cardboard box was both the kind of equalizing object, anyone could have a cardboard box to play in, and it was also the object that was the most full of imagination and fascination, and children felt they could turn it into a spaceship or mess it up or draw on it or get inside it or whatever they were going to do. And then we started asking them, okay, so where's the cardboard box online? And then they would begin to talk sometimes about Minecraft. They might talk about, they told us about things I'd never thought about before. This was during the pandemic, so they talked about playing hide and seek on Zoom with people who were in separate places, but there were ways, I would say sometimes, then they would play with Zoom in ways I never thought of, but I can't do it here. But if you're a child, you can turn yourself around and your head comes in from the top of the screen, and anyway, you know what kids are like. So they played in ways that I think the designers hadn't thought about and could think about, and it only takes talking to some kids. So we then started kind of workshopping what would be the principles, what would be the things you would want designers to think about, and we began workshopping it with the designers of digital games and digital play spaces, emphasizing also that kids don't just play in a game that says, hello, this is a game. They might play anywhere. They might play on the Amazon website, filling up their basket with ridiculous objects and then leaving it at the till. They'll play where they want to play. So we really started trying to kind of think Are there ways, are there routes that we could take this in? So, as you can see, we designed a design tool, and I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip the next bit. I did just want to note, especially, well, we tried to set out some of this for health visitors in the article on the left, and I just wanted to note the kind of call, the growing call for guidance on early years setting on the right, which I think is a kind of growing action movement. But I wanted to leave you with the idea that maybe as we have child rights in the real world, or we hope to, we aspire to, we should have, we could also begin to design them into the digital world. And if we started to think from different perspectives about what a child rights respecting world would look like in the digital world, I think we would have a lot more child-friendly spaces. It would be much more like Tim Gill's kind of vision of a better world, not just for children, it might be for children and for others. And designers told us, please don't tell us what to do, you people in the university, but give us questions to think about. And so we framed the principles as questions. And then I thought, actually, these are quite good questions for policymakers, and maybe they're even quite good questions for parents and for educators. So as we see children staring at a screen or playing on a laptop, we could say, are they doing something that treats them fairly and equally and supports their vulnerabilities? Have children been consulted in making this product that the children are engaging with? Is it age appropriate for the children who are using it, or is it not? Does it allow them to participate, or is it kind of putting them in a box? Is it safe? Is it privacy respect? You know, they begin to be, in a way, we need the language. And what I heard in Parenting for a Digital Future is how much parents don't quite have the language to discuss the different apps and the different spaces. And that's something they were seeking. And if they could share that language and those questions with the educators, with the health visitors, with the GP, with whoever they turn to, there might be a more kind of nuanced conversation. So I am going to stop with the idea of child rights by design. I can see you have my PowerPoint, so I'm just going to say I do have a blog where we try to write about many of these things. My Australian colleagues are now part of our centre, which also has lots of brilliant ideas and is really focusing on 0 to 8. They have a manifesto for a children's internet. Let us hope it comes about. For the research nerds in the room, we have made an open access research database if you want to follow up on the resources. And so from our website, you can, and we've tried to kind of say, what does it mean, all this research, and how do you find your way through it? And here are my sources, and thank you so much for your attention today.
Thank you, Sonia. We're going to let Sonia just take a seat and have herself a drink while we gather our thoughts. There's lots to think about there, for sure. So we come to the section in the evening where we offer you the opportunity to ask Sonia some questions. Maybe you'd like to know a little bit more about some aspects of her work. Maybe you'd like her to clarify something, or maybe you've got some experience or something that you would like to comment on as well. So if you're in the room tonight, we've got microphones. Even if you've got a booming voice, please use the microphone so that those people at home can also hear what you're saying. Those of you at home, don't forget you can put your questions, comments, suggestions on the Padlet, and we've got some lovely people here at the front who are tracking what's going on at the Padlet, so they'll be able to voice those questions to you. Shall I give you a microphone? You're on it, you're on it. Okay, marvellous. Well, then I'll come down and I will just, I'll chair this. I was really interested in kind of all this discussion about children's rights because last week at the Tactic Conference, Nathan Archer and Mary Maloney were also talking about advocating for children's rights. And one of the things that Mary Maloney was talking about, which is very similar to your conversation here, was about all the noise around educators and parents, and that kind of how to navigate all the sort of all that white noise, I think she described it as. And I just want to start you off with a question. For those people out there who are just entering the world maybe of researching in early childhood and these digital literacies, or for those educators who want to be able to use more in their classrooms but are feeling that kind of concern because of all this kind of this white noise. What's your advice for them to resist the white noise and to kind of follow their sort of their principles and their pathway?
I do think this is a very peculiar moment in a way, that it is, even 5 years ago it wasn't quite like this, so there was a lot of anxiety about screen time, and perhaps it'll all change in 5 years, but maybe it won't. Maybe it'll get worse. The anxieties are about so many different things, and they've become focused on technologies in a way that is, as I've tried to say, unproductive. I carry two thoughts with me. One is every time I listen to what a child says, and ask them to show me what they can do with something, I learn something, and I'm kind of inspired, but you have to tune in, you have to kind of try to set your adult lens aside a bit. And then the other thing, take your lead from children who are using the tech in ways we haven't thought about yet. And then the other thing, and this was, is if you talk to 5 children, you get 5 experiences. And so as soon as you start trying to think, children think, or children do, or this is good, or this is bad, but they are so different.
Yeah.
And, even in my work with teenagers, and people tell me they're all on their phones. And then I go and interview a child who says, well, I don't really like that social media, but I love my PlayStation, and I go home, or and then I'm on Discord, but I do that on my desktop, whatever they do. But, they're not all doing the same thing. They're not all responding in the same way. And so that gives you some scope for intervention, because then you start to think, well, this seemed creative, and this child is saying, I don't really know what to do, or I'm not really sure what the alternatives are, but another child has found the alternatives. So in a way, you can start kind of scaffolding from what one has figured out to what another could do.
Starting with the child, well, that's every good educator's starting point anyway, isn't it? Have we got questions online?
Yeah.
Okay. Could we have a microphone down to the front here, please? Thank you.
I'll follow on from the discussion you were just having about rights. So there's a question here about if you think tech companies respect the rights of a child. Kind of a broad open question.
Well, I could say tech companies, they are actually very diverse. I think broadly no, and broadly, but they're on a journey too. There is increasing talk about, certainly talk about child protection in the digital environment, but of course also a big push for children to learn and to get edtech, and so there's a lot of pressure on those tech companies, increasing efforts to regulate the companies to respect children's needs, well-being, rights, however you frame it. I often feel ambivalent about that, because I would say there are several stories. One is tech companies are realizing they have to do something about child safety online, but very reluctant to do something about the business model, which takes their data and pushes ads and sends their data off into an ecosystem that monetizes and profiles. So, quite happy in a way to design playful, fun spaces for children, but not to rethink, you know, what the funding model is. Maybe it's subscription and only wealthy kids can afford it. You know, so yes and no, and an awfully long way to go.
Okay, we've got a question in the room. Oh, we've got two questions in the room. We'll come to you next.
Hello.
Hi.
You spoke earlier about the desire from parents and teachers around the development of state guidance in terms of kind of engaging with digital technology. Obviously, we like to think that policy developments are always in the interests of the child, but in reality, we know that's not necessarily always the case. I wonder if you had any comments around what you think this sort of guidance could or should look like, and whether you had any concerns over certain discourses potentially dominating the guidance that comes out?
I might take my lead from those of you here with, you know, who are kind of, in a way, working with some of that guidance or seeing how that guidance might play out on the ground. Parents and early years educators, I've heard asking for it because they say it is impossible to review everything in the App Store, and everything in the App Store says 4+, and it clearly isn't. So how do I know? And everything says educational, but it clearly isn't. So how do I know? So then it seems appropriate that there should be some kind of expert body that has the time and knowledge to produce some rules and guidance. But I think your implication is then it can become very kind of normative and do-goody and kind of main top-down. And so one way forward would be to set some minimum standards. So you kind of keep out the egregious or the exploitative, but then you allow for maximum diversity and flexibility within what, you know, doesn't kind of positively offend. That might be one way. So there's a way you have guidance that keeps things out, and a very large set of options that parents could choose from. Or that you take our approach of asking questions. So you say, you know, Common Sense Media, for example, doesn't tell you what, you know, which is quite widely used, has guidance which doesn't say you should use this or you should use that, but if you're going to choose this, be aware that it contains violence, or that its parents have recommended it for older children than yours, or it does have a lot of advertising, which is a shame, but there you go. Or, so I think there'll be different ways of doing it that aren't overbearing. Again, it would need to be consultative and ideally evidence-based.
Thank you. Do you still have a question there?
Hello. I wanted to ask, do you think that there should be a focus not just on how children use technology, but on how adults use technology and how that impacts on child development? Because we so often see children being ignored by adults who are absorbed in their technology, so are not interacting with their young children in a way that we would advocate as educators. So should we focus, or do you have any thoughts on the impact of adult use of technology on the development of young children?
So I think, so I know this is a big, I mean, I feel it myself when I see a parent staring at their phone and the child is, trying to make eye contact and not getting it. So I completely get it, but I also want to suggest the parent might be checking the bus time, or taking an urgent message, or worrying about when they've got to be back at work, or just timing out because it's exhausting being on your own with a small child. So, I want to give parents a bit of slack there. And I suppose the developmental question is not, is the parent attending to the child then and there, but does the parent interact with the child sufficiently for the child to be thriving and doing well? And, for that we need to kind of see the bigger picture of that child's life, and are they getting enough? So it's not necessarily the phone is bad, but is the child getting enough interaction, stimulation, as well as sleep and nutrition and the other things. So I think it's just very hard for us to judge when we glance over at a parent, but there may be a problem. And I think for everybody, you know, the big regulatory push now is to try to curb the kind of attention-grabbing algorithms and attention-grabbing feeds that I think everybody probably would put their hands up and say, you know, an hour may have passed when they were just lost in the infinite scroll. It's hard for everybody, and it's not what anyone especially asked for, and it's astonishing that the regulators can't deal with it. It would help parents, but it would help all of us.
So not dissimilar to really your mental health mind map that you had up there, we could say probably the same thing about children's development, couldn't we? That maybe there's an element of adults using screen technology that might contribute, might exacerbate, or might support those children's development, but there are probably a whole wide range of factors kind of involved, and I guess with every child there's a different combination of all those factors.
And I also think we should be careful about our comparisons. It's not like every child received the perfect amount of kind of stimulation and attention before the invention of the smartphone. There were other problems and there were other things, and so, you know, we're not a very child-friendly society in terms of what we provide and how we support parents as well as how we support children. But still, I understand that when I see the parent ignoring the child and staring at the phone, I think, oh, put it down. Yeah,
Will do. Shall we go back to Harry and Laura online?
So we did get the same question online about thoughts about parents using their phones while they're with their children. There was also another question around parents that I'll ask as a follow-up. Is there any evidence that you know of to suggest that parents' relationship with their technology has a significant impact on the relationship their children form with their technology? And they go on to ask if external influences such as IT lessons in schools may have more of an impact or a societal impact?
Well, there are several other experts in the room who have read the literature too, so they may add. I've seen, most of the research I've seen is with teenagers, not with early years, on the kind of technoference and the idea that the technology gets in between them. So if the parent is staring at their phone a lot, perhaps that sets a model for the children. I think the idea of modeling device use is a strong idea, and role modeling itself has a lot of evidence behind it. I don't think I could say there's a lot that the way in which the parent uses the phone or the technology around a small child has been shown to have an impact on the child's phone use. It certainly has an impact on family interaction and a certain level of conflict and frustration. So lots of children, yes, lots of evidence that children find it very frustrating and want to get their parents' attention and hello, I'm here. So conflict. And actually there's a fair amount of evidence that technologies are part of a conflictual setup at home generally. Yeah, for multiple reasons.
I'll ask the question that's had the most discussion here. There's a ton of discussion under it.
I have to go and check this Padlet afterwards.
Yeah,
do I have
do.
access?
Yes, you do.
Yes.
It says, you mentioned some examples of good screen time. Do you have thoughts about what can be good screen time, or is it not that simple?
Well, I just think there are multiple, you know, what I try to say in Child Rights by Design is there are multiple criteria. So a lot of advertising and data, you know, data capture is bad screen time, if you like. Age inappropriate content may be kind of stretching for some children, and some children may also like to watch things for younger children, which we also know they quite like. But promotion of skinny bodies for small children doesn't seem, you know, doesn't seem healthy, doesn't seem productive, actually not for anybody. Clearly some content has been generated with educational input. So I think we could call that good. It's just parents don't necessarily know. And so many products come with a "we consulted an educational expert" kind of advertising that may or may not mean anything. But then there's also a lot of variation. Some children love storytelling content. Some children love ways of, making music or something that makes them dance, and that's not going to be stimulating or stretching for other children. Some families are interested in kind of supporting religious values in their children, and for others that would be, the last thing they want. And, so I think we have to allow a bit of scope for families to say what they think is good, and I might stand back and say, is this child lively, interested, self-motivated, confident, able to kind of make their choices but also turn away and do something else, asking questions when they have a problem or are worried, those might be the tests rather than, but you're doing the project on the content on YouTube, so I look forward to your answer.
Was the question about content?
Yeah, what's good and bad content?
Technology as a whole.
Yeah.
It's more good and bad screen time, but I imagine content. Yeah.
Because actually, I mean, you talked about it earlier, didn't you? That things like WhatsApp enable connection with wider family members that physically children can't see on such a regular basis. So you might argue that actually that is enhancing some sort of relationships, isn't it? And helping to build relationships. And equally, you can see there's quite a lot of really good examples from places like Reggio Emilia, where they use digital technologies really fluently within their offer, creatively and as a tool to enable better or different ways to look at things, actually. So they're not all made equal, but it's actually how we use them, not necessarily what we're using, maybe. Yes, there's another question just sort of behind you, if you just pass the mic back.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Sonia. I was wondering whether you had any insight from, potentially from international comparisons and comparative analysis of this debate, and that would possibly suggest that the debate itself and the way we're framing it, even as a researcher, is very Western, and that this discussion about the ban is or is not a universal question, and is actually related potentially to a particular conception of childhood, of the relationship between adults and children, and so on. Is there any sort of more global comparison that can inform us on that point?
Well, there's a growing amount of research in many countries around the world. I think it's completely fascinating to kind of try to locate the research in different cultural contexts. Two kind of generalizations come to mind when in relation to your question. One is I think there are many parts of the world where the get on board with the prepare for the digital future discourse is the dominant discourse. And in a way, we feel a bit digitally saturated, so we're having a different debate. But in many parts of the world, getting access, getting stable connectivity, feeling that you can be part of something that your wealthier compatriots have already got, that's really the dominant so I'm talking about poorer countries, often in the global south, often where devices are thought of as more shared rather than, or for the household rather than for the individual, and children kind of want their part in that, and often the brokers, the ones who know, the ones who could explain to others. So that's a status. We're saturated with this, and we're really beginning to wonder what we've bought into in staring at screens. Is in a way a sort of debate for the privileged part of the world, but I think it's spreading like wildfire. So we've just done a report on smartphone bans in schools, and we were trying very hard to look at research in different, so this is older children now. We were really trying hard to look internationally and just finding that the idea of a smartphone ban in school has gone like wildfire in many parts of the world where it's quite a puzzle, because if a child is lucky enough to have access to a smartphone, that is a learning device, that is access to information, and it's weird to say we're not going to let them learn from it or with it. So I think there are some cultural clashes as a fashionable Western debate overrides what for many parts of the world is, you know, getting access to a very valuable tool.
Thank you. Question further back.
Thank you so much for this, and I completely agree that children are much more intuitive with digital media than adults are. My question was about self-generated content on the internet, especially TikTok and other social media, and I just wanted to know about your thoughts or your opinion on this self-generated content, especially when it comes to early childhood or, you know, children who are very, very young.
Do you mean, are you talking about influencers, or are you talking about sexual content, or anything?
Any content. I'm talking about, say, videos that are put up by really young children and their digital footprint online, and your opinion on that.
I think that is a great question. I think there are lots of things going on there. You know, as a generality, I don't think there's so much happening. There's a small number of very young children who post, but absolutely heavily mediated by their parents, usually. And there is a trend for, let's say, a small number of parents to think they can actually make money out of this. And that becomes the kind of child influencer phenomenon, which seems to kind of go in fashions and waves in different parts of the world at different times, but does not characterize the majority of children anywhere. It's like what we might say it's very problematic. We might even say it's a form of child exploitation. There's a kind of effort to apply child labour laws to, you know, again, not to say children shouldn't do it because they might enjoy it, but let's make sure they're getting enough sleep and still getting their education and have time to play with their little brother and sister and so on. But broadly, I suspect that we've moved through a very recent transformation from the idea that anyone could post, anyone could share, anyone could create, to actually most people don't. And most people are browsing, most people are looking at content made by others, and that creative moment almost seems to have faded. So most don't post very much, create very much. You saw it in the stats there, actually. Doing something creative with tech, few. Looking at what other people have made, most. So I really think, I don't know what we expect of 0 to 3-year-olds, but I do think it is a potentially creative tool, and we're not harnessing it yet. It's quite different from the business model and making a ton of money. And datafication is a huge concern. I mean, there are lots of proposed regulations now around the world just to say, if it's a child, don't take their data, full stop. But nowhere has implemented that effectively.
Okay, good. Another question here.
Hi, thank you. You've obviously been talking a lot about technology as a tool. A lot in schools now and with parents is using a tool as like a rewards-based system. So especially in neurodiverse kids, you're kind of seeing it as they've been good all day, they can have screen time. Do you think this will then later impact how they view technology as they're adults? Like how this will then impact, just them going forward with their technology usage?
Good question, and I'm going to resist predicting the future. I suppose I was trained as the kind of psychologist that would rather children were not didn't learn through a simple kind of reward and punishment system altogether, but that what we want them to do is to learn to self-regulate and set their own goals and kind of manage those. And so if we do everything through stick and carrot, then we're not teaching that notion of gradual independence and different goals that children might want to pursue in their different ways. So, but I understand the need for maybe some kind of classroom management techniques if you've got children facing different challenges and one child's challenge is a disruption for others. Then maybe what I would like is more teachers in the classroom.
Oh, well, let's not get started on that. A question right at the back.
Thanks very much for that. Really enjoyed it. Just a question around the intersection of inequality. So how do traditional forms of inequality along class lines, along ethnic lines, how do they pan out? Are they winners? Again, those who traditionally get the most out of, any advancement out of education, or has technology in the early years become the great equalizer? Has it democratized opportunities for creation, participation, or is creativity through technology again following the same old trend that all other inequalities follow?
I think it may be too soon to tell in a way, but what we could see from research, I think the dominant trend is digital inequalities kind of mirror social inequalities, the underlying social inequalities. So when there are new resources, new opportunities, new tech, more privileged parents get them sooner, also have the time and the skills and the knowledge and the kind of competitive vision, if you like, to reproduce, so social reproduction rather than social equalization. But I also, I think there are interesting ways in which, I'm struck by how many parents without much disposable income invest, if you like, disproportionately in tech as the way of getting their child ahead, and maybe feeling that they're not going to have the background and the education to immerse their child in books, but they can buy them a computer and they can kind of encourage. So, maybe for some there is a kind of a workaround, and it's might seem like a less demanding or lower cultural capital route to success. But the trouble is that we're living in a world of kind of such fast-paced innovation that by the time they've invested in that route, your more privileged parent is always ahead on the next. They're taking their kid to the Gen AI class on Saturdays.
Thank you. And I think at that point we will, we could keep talking all night, but I think at that point we'll just say thank you once again to Sonia for talking with us. Thank you. For your questions. Which just leaves me with a few of our latest offers or our upcoming offers to inform you about. Our next public lecture will be coming in April. And we are delighted to have Professor Richard O'Neill coming in to talk to us about the story of playing with words around the campfire and becoming the best-selling children's author and academic. So that will run in the similar lines to this. It will be a hybrid venture, and we will have the ROMLIT team helping to host that. So do put the date in your diary. A little closer in time, next week we have our next reception class teacher network meeting, and we've got the wonderful Debbie Kite Hartland joining us. talking about capturing children's learning. So she's an experienced talker about pedagogical documentation. She's specifically going to look at those practical, purposeful and positive documentation practices that we can engage with. So if you're not already a Reception Class Teacher Network member, then you can sign up on the website. Some opportunities to join in the research projects here at UEA. So the TIKES team are currently looking for a senior research associate. If you're interested, the link is on the Padlet, or you can find it on the UEA vacancies pages. So help them analyse content on YouTube Kids or TikTok and other digital platforms. There's also an opportunity if you're a practitioner out there. The TIKES team are really keen to know about your thoughts on digital technologies in your early years settings. Again, there's a link on the Padlet there for you, so it's a very quick, easy Microsoft form. Do have a look and share your experience of working with children in this aspect. The Little Minds team are also looking for early year settings. If you'd be interested to work with the Little Minds team piloting their program, they're really putting out, asking for expressions of interest at this point, so you're not signing up for anything, but if you're interested, there's free staff training and CPD that comes along with it. It's running from January through to April, so if you think it's something you might be interested in, again, look at the Padlet or go onto our web pages. And here you'll find both the link and the QR code to our web pages. There's also a QR code there, and there's a link on our Padlet for some feedback. It's always useful to know how you found this evening, whether you're in the room with us or online. Your feedback feeds into then how we develop our future events. If you're in the room with us, you've got a paper copy of the feedback form. If you fill that in and pop it in the feedback box in the foyer, we would be delighted to exchange it for a glass of wine and maybe something to eat. So thank you everybody for joining us this evening. For those of you at home, you can rest, relax and remove yourself from the screen. For those of you in the room, do join us upstairs in the foyer and let's carry on talking. Thank you very much.